Every night, the same dream.
And every morning, the same nightmare.
Stranger. The fate of the multiverse depends on us. Careful, Stephen. This path exacts a heavy toll. Okay.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. And to show that he didn't destroy our friendship after making me watch JLA, we've got Will Short back. Will, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad that we could maintain our relationship past that point, and it worked. You accepted me back, and now I know you'll never leave me. And I'm excited to be here to talk about this movie.
Yeah, when I saw it in the theater, I saw it on opening day. It came out a few days early in Japan, so I got to see it before everybody else did, which I loved, because usually it's the opposite here. Mm-hmm. And my wife was very understanding. She's like, yeah, you can go see Doctor Strange. I'll watch our daughter. So it was all good. That did mean that I wasn't able to watch it a second time to prepare for this. So I'm just going off my memory of that, and also what we talked about. Also the plot summary here I've got open on Wikipedia. Sure. But before we talk too much about the movie itself, what's your history with Doctor Strange as a character?
Doctor Strange, I think, I'm a longtime comic book reader. I started when I was like 4 or 5, and I was the Marvel guy first. And some of my first comics were a lot of like kind of classic 80s runs that came from my cousin's comic book collection, which that was still, really it was always true, but that was certainly a time when Doctor Strange was the guy who shows up and tells you that shit's hit the fan. That's largely, and in some way that's unknowable. My first exposures were never as a solo character, or even not usually as a member of a team. He was usually the guy who shows up. It's like the opposite of a Galactus, kind of, as in he doesn't show up because he's the shit hitting the fan. He's the one, you don't understand, the multiverse is falling apart, that kind of guy. So, and of course, his characterization for the longest time was really just kind of a formal man, who speaks like, not with many contractions and referring to a lot of magical things. And then later on, I got into Defenders, reading the Defenders run, like especially J.M. DeMatteis. I really enjoyed his run. And that is kind of from an era of comics where everybody had personality at Marvel, but it wasn't the deepest characterization. I don't even mean to criticize it. I really enjoy that run. But it is the storytelling type in, 1984 or whatever is a bit different than we would approach now.
Right. It was much more... everything was much more compressed into a single issue, so you didn't have as much the space to really kind of explore characterization like you do with more modern comics.
Right. And so his character to me really was like Reed Richards, partly just because of the white temples of his hair and the fact that he had a mustache and didn't just hang out and pal around with the X-Men or the Avengers. He came across as older, more studied, more formal, and certainly his countenance supported that as well. He's a guy who lives somewhere in Greenwich Village and just kind of keeps to himself until he's an introvert for sure. It seems until he needs to be otherwise. And then I have not read a lot of the, I guess, the more modern takes. I'm really glad that he has gotten. It seems partly because of him having a presence in the MCU now, that they're trying to crack him open and give him some more definition. He has a great origin story. It is a classic Stan Lee, like, what is wrong with you, and then we'll put some stuff on top of you, like the superhero or the fantastical layer of the egomaniac, the completely arrogant person who has this hubris. But my interest in him as a character often wasn't real strong because of those reasons. He didn't have a deep characterization. He didn't, his power set being, I'm a magic man. I am the most magic man of all magic men. Like, it felt like, well, that's great, but that doesn't make, to me, for an interesting character right away. And certainly at a younger age, the idea of dealing with a man who got over a complete self-centeredness, that interests me a lot more now than it would have at the time. I don't even think I considered it very much at the time. So, you know, he was basically a guy who was a garnish or the spice on the dish of a superhero story, not so much the meal itself. And I always thought, being a guy who grew up on like Sandman and Swamp Thing and these kinds of Vertigo stories, it was like, well, this guy should be, in my mind, over here doing this stuff.
Right.
That's really where he should live. Now, I'm not even saying that's true, but that's just where my tastes lie. Like, clearly, that's not how you make action figures, and millions upon millions of dollars is putting him in like some kind of, you know, Constantine type setting. But I do think that's where I would, if I were to make a Doctor Strange movie, that's where I would put him, and that's where I like to see him, is dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, very similar things. Like, I mostly knew him from the Defenders, which, like I mentioned in the last episode, you actually introduced me to. And I had started reading like the Gerber stuff. I loved that run as well. The DeMatteis run was also amazing. The thing I loved especially about the Gerber run is because you had all these like really kind of volatile personalities, right? You had you had, you know, Hulk, who was like in his very childlike state, and you had the Red Guardian, who's like the level-headed one in the group, and then Valkyrie, and then all these cuts, and then you had Doctor Strange, who, whenever I read the Gerber issues, I always got the feeling that every time Doctor Strange is not in the panel, he's off panel somewhere, like throwing back shots, because he's got to deal with all these nutbags.
I've always, since becoming of drinking age a while ago now, I thought, oh yeah, he's got to have like mystic wines from other dimensions that just soothe the soul in a certain way to deal with the Hulk and Silver Surfer and Submariner all at once.
Yeah.
Or when people don't understand, because I'm sure he still gets frustrated the way a doctor would when they're trying to explain something to you. It's like, no, this is how the astral plane works in Captain America. You're just not getting it. And I got to throw him back at the end of the day. Yeah, that's a really good, I think that's an excellent point. And I do think that he was kind of the old saying of like, this person's the gas, this person's the brakes. He was kind of the brakes in that team setting, where he is the most together person. He is not usually the reason, like the personality reason that a conflict is arising.
Right. And I think the points you make about his characterization was really kind of why his books really had a trouble finding an audience throughout the years, because they've been so many attempts at solo series, and like even Warren Ellis tried his hand at it at one point, and I read the Warren Ellis stuff, and it's okay, but he doesn't have, like, if you're gonna do something like Doctor Strange, like, you know, if you're gonna do this kind of like mystical urban fantasy type thing, you can't have it too steeped in the mystical side of thing, what I think a lot of the comics had. Whereas you look at someone like John Constantine, who's much more integrated of those two worlds, like the modern world, and he's got such an interesting personality. He's so interesting as a character that you're willing to follow that guy into any sort of craziness. Doctor Strange never really kind of had that, I don't think, and that was one of the things that always kind of fell short with me with his comics. And it's a tragedy, because like you said, I think that he does have that kind of potential to do a lot more of that kind of weird Vertigo type stuff, which was why I was really kind of disappointed when they had tried to make him one of the Avengers and everything in the comics and all that, because my interpretation of Doctor Strange is always like, no, he's not the guy you want to hang out with. He's the guy you go to when all the other shit has failed. And now it's like, oh crap, now we got to go to the big creepy Sanctum Sanctorum. We got to deal with, you know, this weird arrogant doctor who's always like, you know, he's always pissed at us for asking questions.
And his experience, I mean, and this is a cool character trait, or at least an interpretation of him I would have, but he's always got his head in stuff that is beyond the understanding of your average person, and not because even of technical reasons like a doctor, although that you can apply that kind of attitude to it. But I mean, he is the mystical guardian of this universe, or however you want to put it. And so that means that he has to be aware of so many things, and so many things that are so abstract, you know, in a Steve Ditko weird background psychedelic kind of way, that I mean that he really, it's not that he can't relate to people, but his daily regimen of dealing with things is just straight up weird, like in a way that we can't, you know, most people would not relate to. And therefore I feel like the more time he spends there, the less relatable he becomes as a result. And that is, on one hand, a cool conflict to have for a character, where it's like, if he has a reason to want to connect to people. But these are things that are all great to talk about in terms of like a solo book or a novel or a TV show. But the thing is, he also lives always in the Marvel universe. Whereas, John Constantine, even though he started off in the Swamp Thing episode or issues that Alan Moore wrote that were technically in the DCU, he kind of was in it, but wasn't in it when he was at Vertigo, and now he is back in it.
Yeah, they kind of separated him out for a while, and they kind of had him and a lot of the other Vertigo characters just kind of like doing their own thing.
Right. And it made sense why, because a lot of those books, they weren't even interacting with each other a lot of the time. I mean, Sandman has plenty of references to the DCU and Swamp Thing and these things, but those are, author choices more than a mandate of, well, these books all live in the same world.
Right.
And Doctor Strange has at times been, portrayed as a superhero, sometimes quite literally. Like there was a time, when he used to have a mask.
Oh, yeah, the 1990s, yeah.
Yeah, and they've really tried to, they keep trying to tweak him one way or the other to make him fit. And I'm all for, if you ever find that, equation that makes him a perfect fit for a thing, that's great. But there is, I think you and I were talking about maybe off mic last time about, or at least I feel this way, about the X-Men working best not in the Marvel universe, but in a universe, and certainly cinematically, where they are the only super beings around, because how can you be afraid of them but not Spider-Man or not Captain America or whoever? And with Doctor Strange, it's not that I don't like him interacting with the superheroes, but if you put him in a world where also mutants exist and there's all these different kinds of magic things going around, I don't really want to get into all the continuity of it, but it does complicate his world and kind of cheapen his place in the universe, because you've got 20 different writers writing different kinds of magic over different years, or actually thousands of writers writing different kinds, and it just kind of, if you put him as a solo character, you kind of have to cut him, in my opinion, you have to cut him off a bit to make him make sense. Either he's a part of a team and he's a center focus of calm, and he generates stories by saying, I'm aware that the Eye of Agamotto has told me that this thing's happening and now we all got to take care of it. But that's me kind of viewing him, I will admit, in a limited way. Because I also, when I watch these movies, the first Doctor Strange movie and now this one, it is a bit of a adjustment to get used to even a wisecracking, which is not my favorite thing, Doctor Strange, or a Doctor Strange that will call a child, hey kid, what are you up to? That even speaks that way. And while that's a personal preference on my part, it is quite at odds with the version I'm used to, but I'm also not the type that says, well, why did you make it different from the comics? Because you're making a movie and it's not a comic. And what's going to work in this world, this MCU, they found a thing that they like. We'll get into it, I guess, here in a little bit, but it's a character that the Hulk kind of felt this way for a long time. Now he has a more obvious appeal, but he is a bit of a Batman as far as you can do 1,000 different versions of the Hulk and they all can kind of feel right in a way.
Yeah.
And Marvel seems to always be pushing a character like the Hulk in a slightly or a very different direction to try and find where is he fitting right now? Because this is a character that's very dependent on where, for some reason, where culture is or where our shared consciousness is or something. Versus, obviously Captain America may reflect certain, a political situation or just where we are as a culture, but he's Captain America every day, all day.
Right.
Superman similarly.
Yeah.
And Doctor Strange doesn't have the iconic value that the Hulk does, and hasn't had as many bites at the apple or as many successes as the Hulk has as far as pop culture goes. But similarly, I think it's the kind of thing where it's like, well, right now, what does 2022 need out of a Doctor Strange? They're always trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
But I would love to see, as a guy, again, who grew up after not reading superhero comics for a while, loving Sandman and loving the Alan Moore Swamp Thing and all that stuff. I would love to read a 1980s, British author version, like mature comics, quote unquote, version of Doctor Strange. But I also love it if he shows up and says, you don't understand. The Eye of Agamotto has told me, to the Avengers all of a sudden. There's value to him in all these different places.
One thing I would love to see, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say what his defining trait is beyond arrogance, originally being kind of his Achilles heel, and now what is his defining trait as a character? Not that every character should just have one, but you can point to a lot of characters and describe them in a few words if they're iconic or if they echo throughout time.
Right.
And he's not so easily. It's hard to do that unless you just say magic, speaks with kind of highfalutin. That's how I know him.
Yeah. And one of the things I would love to see is if Marvel is ever able to get Grant Morrison to come back to them, because he's so steeped in chaos magic and all that stuff. Like having him do a Doctor Strange book, I think would be, it would be the most interesting Doctor Strange book that's ever been published.
It certainly would, and I would take a guess that it would. One, like is often the case with Grant Morrison's work, even though you and I, as big Grant Morrison fans, want it, we may be surprised by what we would get if they even took on that role. Because given also, I have a very cursory knowledge through Grant Morrison of chaos magic, but the idea of a postmodern magic and how that would appear in the world, and certainly in a world where it's even based on the Marvel universe, I would love it. I would sign. Obviously, I'd be there day one. I would buy 3 copies to give to friends or something. That would be a dream. But I also, I almost feel like that would be. I almost want to see, not even knowing who's been writing it or keeping up. Maybe they've already given me something that I would like, and I just haven't been pursuing it. But I almost want to see kind of what they've done with Silver Surfer with Mike Allred doing the art.
When Dan Slott was writing it.
Yeah, I didn't even read that. It's just the vibe I got when I would look at the art, where it's like it is a bit of a throwback in the way that Mike Allred's art is very classic in that way, but also indulging the weird of it without becoming a retro throwback thing. Engaging, and some of that feels like a Morrison influence. Some of the books that have done that kind of thing, that feels like when he does superheroes, it's weird. Let's do it that way, where you indulge, like a Doom Patrol, where you indulge the inherent silliness of some of these things. But I kind of want to just see a completely different take, even on his character, like where he's at these days. Because I just don't. There's not an easy hook on the character. He is more plot. He's a walking plot generator in a lot of ways. And I'm sure if someone is a big Doctor Strange fan and followed him through the 70s and 80s, I'm sure there are great stories in there that, he gets a characterization. But, for the interpretation or the experience of someone who just kind of crosses paths with him often in comics, reading him like me, that is, at the end of the day, he doesn't make much of an impression beyond the appearance, the Eye of Agamotto, the way he speaks, the things that tend to happen when he's around.
Right. Yeah. It's not like where, if you've got other characters, guest starring in different comic books, like, for example, you have Wolverine appearing in different comic books. Wolverine's got a very distinct personality. What you see him, what kind of character he is. Even if you've never read an X-Men comic or a Wolverine comic, he's got this very distinct personality that comes through in the guest appearances. Spider-Man as well, too. Doctor Strange never quite had that. Like you said, he's always just felt like more of a plot device than anything else when he appears in these other books. And circling around to the movie now. Well, first off, here's an interesting question. Did you ever see the original Doctor Strange movie?
No.
And I'm talking the one from 1978.
Right. And I know you and Derek covered it. I've been meaning, I have that episode saved on my phone, and I meant to get to it before. I also saw that you guys did Dr. Mordred, which I only became aware of because I actually did get to see this movie twice, luckily. Before we're talking about it now, I saw it once at Alamo Drafthouse where they do all the front matter, all the fun old trailers, and they showed the Doctor Strange TV movie. They didn't show the whole thing, but they showed like a trailer for it.
That's awesome.
And then also for Dr. Mordred, and I was like, well, man, now I got some stuff I need to catch up on here because this looks like some fun trash, basically. And when I say trash, I don't mean low enjoyment, just like I'm talking about like the amount of money and care put into it. Yeah. But you guys said y'all generally liked it because I think I heard
it was surprisingly good. Like I was really kind of surprised because this is 1978, a TV production. Like I did not go in when Derek told me about it that when he picked that movie. I'm just like, oh god, this is gonna be so painful to watch. It actually was surprisingly good. Effects. There were obviously some things, but even for not even just for a 1970s TV show, for a 1970s superhero TV show, for a 1970s, primetime drama in general, it was pretty good for that time because most of the dramas there were not very well done back then.
Sure. Well, and you're the one that's seen it, so I don't mean to speak out of turn, but like it gives me the little bit of impression that I've gotten of it. I mean, what was it, Kojak the Night Stalker, or am I mixing two? I think I'm mixing two. But there was like a supernatural, like occult detective show.
Yeah, it was Kolchak, I think it was called.
Cool. Okay, so there was kind of like, and similar later on with the Incredible Hulk television show. It wasn't supernatural. It had a different bent.
Right. It was
But
more like
there
the fugitive but he turns green occasionally.
But these 70s, early 80s television shows where it's like, here's our drama, it's got a high concept, and every week a different thing happens, and maybe you go to a different place. And there's not, like, we didn't have the serialized storytelling approach that we would, now with HBO or something like that.
Right.
But, and it seemed like, oh, yeah, you could do a relatively low budget, like, not I'm shooting beams out of my eyes and hands version of Doctor Strange in that time period specifically. That, I mean, hell, you could do like a period piece now that I would love to see. I think there should be more of those with superhero or with comic characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really appealed to me on that level of like, oh man, 70s television. There's something about the way it looks, man. So I need to check it out.
And also, Jessica Walter was in it. She played the villain.
I saw that.
Yeah, which was surreal watching that and seeing her in there. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Lucille Bluth.
Exactly. Yeah, I know.
And she looks really hot.
Oh, dude, she was such a gem all around. She was gorgeous, and of course was just so talented and hilarious that her commentary on the Arrested Development DVDs, which I'm a big commentary head, are some of the funniest things because she's just kind of the grandma. I know she was a very smart person, but she would just kind of wait in the back. And then when one of the kids would be on screen, like Michael Cera, she'd go, look at how handsome he is. That's like all her commentary was just how great everybody looked. So she was, rest in peace to her. She was so great.
Yeah. I loved her. Yeah. But anyway, so what did you, and we're only going to talk about the original the MCU first Doctor Strange a little bit here, but what have you thought? What do you think of the first movie in the MCU?
I enjoyed it. Mostly, I liked the way it looked. I liked the things that they did. I mean, there was a lot of Inception, borrowing for sure, and the effects of, buildings turning on their sides and all that stuff. But it was really well done, especially because, and it's a big complaint that a lot of people tend to have these days that get into superhero stuff or, movie Twitter or whatever, that computer graphics, not my favorite thing in the world, unless, of course, they're doing something I like and I don't even notice it. Usually, right. I'm sure it gets used well. But for that kind of thing, I really liked a lot of the effects because they weren't trying to show me something that I should normally be able to see. They're showing me psychedelic, experiences that really could only be brought to life by intense computer graphics.
Right.
And the style that they applied to it, I wasn't in love with every choice that they made. Like some of the way that they would do magic. And here's the thing, they had such a challenge in front of them. I can't say what I would do different. Who gives a shit anyway? But like, I don't have like they should have done this. It's like, there were things about it that felt cheesy as far as like throwing the lines that are kind of like ropes and all the hand stuff, but also I applaud them for finding a way to do it.
Right.
And a lot of the effects and going through, like when the Ancient One knocks him out, into the astral realm and all those things, that stuff just felt cool. Like I haven't seen that in a movie before, and that it referenced something that in Marvel Comics I've been familiar with for so long. They did a great job, I thought, with that. The main thing, and this will come into play in this movie too, is that it's less that I have a terrible problem with this version of Doctor Strange or think that Benedict Cumberbatch isn't doing good work with what he has, but it is, I wish we had something different. I wish we had a different flavor in the Marvel Universe as a lead goes, because my opinion is that we got Tony Stark, the second batch, is what they kind of gave us, as far as here's a guy with a lot of self-confidence, obviously to an extreme point, who likes to make jokes and rub some people the wrong way, but is very good at what he does. And leaving aside my experience of him in the comics, because again, who cares? Those are comics. These are the movies. But I don't find Cumberbatch I feel like humor is not, if it's not a matter of that not being a strong point, then I just didn't care for the humor that they applied to him. But I found him unlikable as a character for the entire movie, not just for the portion of it where he's in his kind of pre-hero's journey thing. And I didn't entirely buy that he would become, one, that he would go through enough of a heart change, if you want to put it that way, by the end, that he would be the hero that I would want to spend time with. And then he kind of just still felt like less than a joke, like a jokey guy, just kind of a jerk. And if that's his character and that's what they want, then that, mission accomplished. But I was kind of left feeling, well, I don't really want to spend time with this guy. So why would I want another solo movie spending time with someone who really can't be real with anybody? And I know that that's I could also say that of Tony Stark in the MCU, his neuroses, that Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of him, Tony's neuroses were so on the surface, like there's no hiding that he's got that nervous energy of a very confident, smart person who also has intense self-doubt internally that they're hiding with this ego thing. I think that being so on the surface and he's trying to cover it up endears him to me, and I didn't feel like I had a way into the character of Doctor Strange in that movie. I'm sorry, I'm finding a long way around defining why I had the problem I did with him. And it's like not to, gang up on Cumberbatch or critique somebody's writing or whatever. It was just like, this isn't the character I want to spend time with, whether it's Doctor Strange or Ant-Man or Captain Ultra or who gives a shit. Like, it's just not a person I enjoy. And I found myself enjoying everyone else in the movie so much more than him. I loved Benedict Wong as Wong.
Yes, yeah.
Hilarious. You could have made him a movie around him, and I would have been quite happy about that. Mordo. I always struggle with the pronunciation of this actor's name.
Chiwetel Ejiofor. Yeah, I think I don't know.
Okay,
I think I said right either. So
I will try to limit my commentary here because I am just in love with that actor. I think he is so likable and believable and brings so much passion. I saw him in Kinky Boots recently, which is a great movie where he is just brings so much to the screen. But I was so much more invested in him playing Mordo as someone who feels betrayed, which I thought was a really cool choice, turning the villain, the typical villain of the comics, into this, well, I'm a contemporary of yours that then feels betrayed and then later would become a villain because of it.
Right.
I found myself wishing that he was playing Doctor Strange in a different, and with such passion and class. And this is totally fantasy. I mean, that's not a really good critique of a movie to say it should be this way, but I found myself so drawn to him that I was like, I just wished for a version, because also the idea of a black surgeon in America that perhaps had to deal with, because as it is, I don't know what struggles Doctor Strange had. Seems like he's just good at stuff and then now is fine. That would lend some more credibility, just without even saying what the backstory is, to why he might have developed such a ego shell around him. And I would have just probably, I say I would accept that. Who knows? I'd probably have a critique then too. But I found myself enjoying the characters surrounding him so much more than him, which kind of reminds me of Defenders. Reading Defenders again. Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because I had the complete opposite reaction to Cumberbatch, because I totally get all your points and very much the Tony Stark similarities. That's all, perfectly valid. I mean, there is a lot of that. And when you see them riffing on each other in Infinity War, you do get the sense at some points that it's just like the same guy arguing with himself.
Yeah.
That being said, though, I don't know. I love Cumberbatch's performance of this, and maybe it's just I'm attracted to that kind of character type, because I think that's probably a big part of it. Although I do, and I think he's much more interesting as a character here in these movies than he's ever been in the comics. Like, I don't feel like in the comics he ever had much of a personality, really, like we were talking about before. Whereas here, I feel like there's much more to latch onto and to follow along and to relate to, because it's so hard to relate to Doctor Strange in a lot of those comics. So the fact that he's making jokes and he's got this kind of, slightly acerbic personality, I think works so much better than what we got in the comics. Although that being said, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, like, would have been interesting if Cumberbatch had played it maybe a bit more like he played Sherlock. I think that would have been a way to kind of differentiate the character a little bit more from Tony Stark, but would have still kept that kind of arrogance type of thing that was going on.
And I think there's a lot to be, I definitely agree that they've given us they couldn't have given, I mean, I wouldn't even have wanted them to, I don't think, given us the Doctor Strange from the comics, because he is not relatable. He is the permanent adult in the room that you can't, like, even if you're no matter your age, he has more experience than you and he's dealing with things that you just can't fathom. So that's not a person you can make the center of a story, and they have decided to make him the center of a story and a franchise here. So you had to do something to, one, modernize him. and whether it is having him speak more, I mean, just not like a mystic, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And to bring him into the modern world and put him, in a hospital, like what kind of person would, what does a surgeon look like? We've seen the TV version of it. Like, I mean, he is kind of House as a mystic.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
how I kind of see him. And yeah, I think some of it is that.
Oh man, I mean, Hugh Laurie playing Doctor Strange would have been an awesome casting choice.
For it.
Yeah,
yeah, I would have been up for that if he would have been real jittery. The age I would have liked that even more.
The age, yeah. If he was younger, then definitely. But
well, I see. That's the thing is, I mean, and this is all just like, to put all the critique in the right framing. I grew up reading these comics, wishing that I had more access to these characters and more ways to enjoy them. And now they're on screen, and it's just like an embarrassment of riches, and that means that I get to like poke holes in them. So, I appreciate that these things exist. That I was writing Defenders fan fiction in high school when a book didn't even exist, and now Doctor Strange, and we've had a series that's not the Defenders, but at least they called it that.
Right.
So all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think what I wanted was more. And this is thinking more in broader terms of what we've gotten from the MCU. I do get tired of similar humor appearing in most of the movies, and that's just a personal taste thing. I think I saw an opportunity that I wanted something different of, diversity of any other kind would have been great, but not even thinking in terms of racial or whatever. Thinking in terms of if we had someone who wasn't the jokester, who was maybe not a stick in the mud, but who was more a little more intense and a little more. And he is intense. Cumberbatch is playing it. He's doing the work for sure.
Right.
But just a different type of character, a type of hero. Because I mean, Captain America is maybe the most different from that type. But and that was a success where he's like, yeah, he has a few jokes in him, but he's here to do a job, and he's a passionate person and does these things. I feel like a lot of Ant-Man, Iron Man. Thor has kind of leaned this direction, and I get why. It's working, and people are wanting it, and it is funny often. But I think I was like, oh, I wish that we didn't get another one of this type. And if it was someone older, it didn't have to be, but if it was someone noticeably older, if it was Hugh Laurie or whatever, that would just throw another slight wrinkle into the casting landscape that we have. And similar if you'd put Chiwetel in the role too, or whoever. Right. I'm not going to sit here and try to relitigate who should be Doctor Strange, because this is who we have. And, but I totally agree that whatever was going to happen, you had to bring, and certainly with the MCU being as it is, very connected and very modern and very poppy. That it had to be something, if not this, then much closer to this than what we ever had in the comics. So, I did enjoy that movie quite a bit. I enjoyed the Ancient One a lot. I know that there was a big problem there with the casting, but what ended up coming out of it was an enjoyable performance, nonetheless. And I liked Mordo. I think Mordo was just my favorite thing about it. And so that he was left off with this, new villain mission at the end of the movie had me a bit excited to see what happens next with him. And then getting into this movie, I didn't expect that he would show up, but I was like, oh, that's just on hold now. Because talk about the multiverse for 2 hours. So yeah, I dug that movie though. I think I've seen I haven't seen every MCU movie, but I think I've seen the appearances he's made. Like, because he showed up in Ragnarok next with that, because they teased that at the end. With the classic yellow Steve Ditko yellow gloves for God knows what reason. He was
right, and then they never brought him back after that. I was surprised
it was insane that they had him in the first place, but God bless him for trying it. And they're, I think I saw him elsewhere before I saw him in his own movie.
Oh, okay.
And so my experience might have been also colored by he is more of a gasoline on the fire of in Infinity War and that kind of thing, where it's like he's immediately at war on a personal level with Tony Stark, where it's like, well, who's the bigger brain in this moment, or who knows what needs to happen next. And so maybe that colored it too.
One of the things I also love about Cumberbatch's performance, and I really picked up on this when I was recording the episode of No Way Home yesterday, and when I was watching it, it's that in No Way Home, it's such a fun movie while you're watching it, and then after it's over, you start to notice the plot holes. And the great thing about Cumberbatch's performance is that you completely buy everything he's saying in the moment, and then afterwards you're like, wait a minute, why is he helping this kid with his universe destroying spell in the first place?
Yes. Well, yeah, his presence in a thing because of his acting ability and now his reputation, and just he has a star power that he can. I mean, he's a character actor. I mean, he can open a movie, but he also can play the character. But he lends credibility, and that's honestly that is a big part of being Doctor Strange is being able to say something stupid like the Bands of Sidorak and it sound serious, not like, look, I gotta say this dumb thing that Stan Lee came up with because it's catchy to him or whatever. So like to be able to come in the room and feel like, oh, there's an adult in charge that knows what's going on, and that yeah, you're right, and that's something that I find more and more with movies, because you see something and you enjoy it, and later you realize, oh wait, the sense behind that is just non-existent.
Yeah.
But that's entertainment. It's when it's not working that you start thinking about those things, or certainly for me, that I start thinking in the middle, wait, why is this happening? And now I want to start using my nerd brain to pick it apart, because I'm not drawn in by people. I mean, because that's the most important thing here.
Right.
Are the characters. Or for me, and especially in these MCU movies, the plot stuff, who cares? I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be. And in whatever Kevin Feige, whatever map he's laid out, it's can the directors and then the actors together convince me for 2 hours that what's happening on screen is personally important.
Right.
And then mission accomplished. And he does bring that, I feel.
All right, so jumping into Multiverse of Madness. Now,
yes,
for anyone who is listening, if you have not seen this movie and you care about spoilers, turn off the podcast, go watch the movie, come back, because this is your spoiler warning. We are going to be talking about a lot of stuff that happens in this movie, because we can't talk about this movie and not spoil it.
I mean, this movie is 90% plot, and that's not even a critique, but there's so many things that happen in it. It is just a turducken of plot points shoved in there that you can't talk about it without talking about all the things that happen in it.
Right.
Because there's a ton of them.
Yeah. So first thing is, this picks up on from what happened at the end of WandaVision. And I guess that's probably the big elephant in the room is Wanda's character, because there's been a lot of reaction to that. So what, both positive and negative to what they did with Wanda in this movie. Now, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I really think I have to see this movie again to really kind of get a sense of, maybe even have another view of WandaVision to really get a sense of how I feel about what they've done to her character here. I will say this, though. I didn't expect them to go this far, this fast. My expectation of this movie was we're going to get hints of Dark Wanda and and the stuff that did with her, and like that John Byrne did with her, or that Bendis did with her and Disassembled. I thought we'd get some hints of that, but I didn't think we'd go full Dark Wanda in this movie. I thought it would be like, she's starting to get corrupted by the Darkhold. I thought maybe the villain was going to be Nightmare, because that was the original rumor when back when Scott Derrickson was still directing this.
Right. Yeah, and I watched WandaVision, and I didn't, up until pretty much everything, and this is, on me for looking at Twitter and not muting certain things, I ended up having almost every reveal. I'm not usually that worried about it, but I'm like, hey, this is a Sam Raimi movie. I'm going to go see it in the theater. I haven't seen a Marvel movie in the theater. I want to not know what's going on. And within a day, I knew everything that happened in the movie, because I just didn't protect my eyes, I guess. But up until when I found out, like, oh, she's like the villain of this piece, I had similar assumptions. Like, I wasn't really frankly, I don't care much about Wanda Maximoff, or whatever I forget what last name they give her in the movie.
It is Maximoff.
It's Maximoff.
Yeah.
Okay. My experience of her in the comics really, and again, keep in mind, I haven't been reading Marvel comics actively in the past 10 years probably, but for the longest time, she's a character with her powers being ill-defined or so powerful, and being, probably because she was the woman, she was given not a lot of personality. Like, again, when someone really loves Scarlet Witch, great for them. But I would ask, like, what do you love about that person? Like, what is the personality trait that stands out to you? And in the comics, I never found a thing. She just kind of was her powers. And again, I feel like that's partly how she was written, because how many times have we had the arc or the story, Wanda's powers are a problem. She is a problem. It's kind of like doing the Dark Phoenix, where the woman is too powerful, but it always, like, it just keeps happening over and over and over. And over again. Right. And Jean Grey ended up with, I think, more defining traits than Scarlet Witch did. But And in the movies, she's had such a weird trajectory as a character because she is being passed off from movie to movie, not as a main character, not as a main Avenger, that everything has felt like I can see the seams of the writer on what's happening with her. And so I personally just never really cared what happens with her, which sounds, she's not a real person, but that sounds callous to me. But I don't want bad things to happen to her, but her powers were weird. I didn't love the way that they costumed her originally. All these things where I'm like, I don't really care what happens next with her. And the time that I cared about her most or the time that I enjoyed her the most was the first few episodes of WandaVision, because I really enjoyed Elizabeth Olsen's performance in the different types of sitcoms. I thought that stuff was great because she nailed it every time, and the production was so great. And once you got into the rest of it, she'd experienced all this trauma, these terrible things with her, her husband dying, the Vision, and her kids. But I also am like, but all of this doesn't feel like it happened in any natural way. It all felt like things that were done to you by a writer to make drama, which is true of all of this, but the illusion of story.
Right.
If I'm thinking of that and it's not working. So when at the end of all that, she walked away from it, and I didn't see the Darkhold part yet of WandaVision, I was like, I kind of need her to pay for this. Like, I kind of need her, because I feel for her, but also this is not okay what's happened. So I don't need her punished necessarily, but I need someone like her to answer for it in a way, or for her to become a villain now, I guess. And then when they cut to her with the Darkhold studying, I was like, okay, well, whatever. That's what we're going to see next, I guess, because this is what we have to do with this character. If we had given her, and there are people out there clearly that really enjoy her, like you're saying, that like are feeling like either, yes, she's, this is a good choice, or I can't believe she's betrayed them and I feel heartbroken over it. But if I had any ability to relate to her as a character, because they gave her such a crazy story because of what they had to deal with the movies and what they established, I would feel so much more for her, performance or not. But as it is, it just feels like something that's happening because the plot dictates it, and we're copying a story from the comics.
Right.
Which is okay for a superhero movie. That's not the biggest thing in the world, but it means that like my sympathy for her, if she were a real person, absolutely. But as it is, I'm like, wow, you're just such a villain. You're way off the rails here. And yeah, and it happened. I can make an argument. I'm a writer too. You and I, we could sit there and make all kinds of arguments for what happens off panel or off screen.
Right.
And in the comics, certainly back in the day, this would have been almost too long for this to happen. Like it would have happened in 3 issues in 1975 Avengers or whatever. So it did feel sudden, but because she didn't feel like a well fleshed out character to me, it felt like just more of the same. Okay, this is her next step. This is her next thing.
Yeah. I really liked WandaVision. And especially her performance. I had a totally new respect for Elizabeth Olsen as an actress after seeing her in WandaVision, because it's not that she was bad in the movies that she did before. It's just her character was such a small portion of everything else that was going on. And compared to like, say, Paul Bettany, who also didn't have a whole lot to work with in the movies up before WandaVision, but he's such a world-class talent that, he still kind of shines through. And Olsen's a little bit more understated. Like, I don't want to diminish her acting abilities at all. It's just that she doesn't seem as obvious a talent as like Paul Bettany does. So when I went into WandaVision, I was actually going into it more to see more Paul Bettany as Vision, because Vision is one of my favorite characters.
Same here.
And I'd also had that same impression of Wanda in the comics. Like, I never really understood why, she's such a popular Avenger. And the most exposure I ever got to her as an Avenger was through Busiek's run. And, he did good things with her. He wrote her very well, but even still, like, she didn't stand out to me in the way that, Iron Man or Captain America or Carol Danvers or Vision or any of the others did. And so, like, when I came out, because Busiek's Avengers was like my first introduction to that concept, to that book.
Yeah.
And so I had some loose familiarity with Captain America, with Iron Man going in. But I gained such a love and respect for characters that I'd never heard of before, like Wonder Man.
Totally.
And Wanda, I just never got that. And she was a mainstay of his run throughout the entire thing. And I just never really connected with her character at all.
And that's probably, again, haven't read every Scarlet Witch thing, but that's some of the most spotlight she ever got because also George Perez, another rest in peace, loved that character so much, and they really wanted to dig into her Romany heritage and all these things. You know, that there was a costume redesign, and yeah, she felt. I mean, the way that she appeared in the movie, the way that she was utilized in the movies, as far as like her percentage of importance to the movie, felt a lot like it very much reflected most of her career in the comics, which is she may get a story about her, but it's usually she's there because, well, that's one of the classic Avengers is what it felt like.
Right.
You got to have her. But when you come, like a lot of the characters you're mentioning, I mean, like, and what we think of as classic Avengers or even just the founding ones, like the Wasp is just on paper an easy again, I'll use the term poppy character. Here's a socialite who also is a superhero. Right. Who shrinks. I mean, like 3 sentences, you're done. Captain America, Iron Man. And it's not that a complicated character can't be good, but it is, as far as a concept goes, given that she has the ties to Magneto, or then later, no, she doesn't. Yes, she does again. I mean, there's all kinds of, fewer characters can you see so much, you know, like corporate bullshit that affects the character, and then also writers like stepping over each other trying to change something that's happened before with this character. So it's not the fault of Wanda Maximoff that she has been under the heel of so many not great choices, in my opinion, or that she's kind of received short shrift. But in the movies, you know, I will definitely say I thought she was great in WandaVision, mostly because I felt that she matched the acting styles of the different, you know, because I grew up on sitcoms, love sitcoms. Right. The different the production matched those styles of sitcoms so well, but she matched the acting style of those so well. And it's like, that's not just an impression, that's like being able to pull out kabuki acting and then method acting and all these things against each other. That was great. And then when it got more into the magic and the true drama of it, I got less interested. Not because of her. Now I had to deal with this real character that I still didn't care that much for, and then we get more of her origin story, why she cares about sitcoms, and that stuff felt, again, very forced to me. And so, and it's a good explanation, but whatever it was, it didn't work for me. And so again, I started looking at, I'm not invested emotionally in this person anymore. So now I'm looking at why do I have to accept all of these? I liked this, and then this happened, and then I joined a terrorist group, and then of course in the comics over 70 years, all those things and more have happened. Right. Because you've been in publication for this long. But as a through line of story of a character arc, what I see is someone being yanked back and forth between because of the needs of the greater MCU. Right. Which is why she's here in this movie, in my opinion. I mean, it's cool. I like that there was something, the comic book nerd in me loves that here's a mini-series about her that is now kind of getting its final act in a Doctor Strange movie. But I also feel like, I mean, one of my questions coming into this to record today was, is this a good Doctor Strange story? Is this a good Doctor Strange movie? I like the movie. Is it a Doctor Strange movie? And I could say yes, but and it's not the fault of Scarlet Witch if it's not, but it doesn't feel like the story has to be Doctor Strange even to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Whole bunch of stuff you said in there, so I'm trying to go back and
that's how I am, guys, so just sorry about that.
But you know, I actually had the opposite. My feelings towards Wanda over the course of WandaVision, it was actually almost an inverse of you. Maybe it's because I'm not as much of a sitcom guy growing up, at least not like the classic sitcom, so that didn't, like, it was fun to watch, but it didn't speak to me in the same way like it spoke to you, or that, you know, it spoke to Derek in the times when we kind of, you know, talked about it in the, because we was airing while we were recording the show. Right. So we'd have like a brief little thing talking about the latest episode, and so that stuff spoke a lot more to him because of that too. Whereas me, I didn't have that same kind of connection to that. So as it got deeper and it got into more of the magic stuff and her trauma and all that, I connected with that a lot more. So that's when she really kind of like that, the flashback scene to Sokovia when she was a kid, that tore me up. I was totally invested in that. The Vision's quote about, you know, what is love, but what is grief, but love persevering. Like, I love that quote, and all that stuff worked completely for me. I'm a total sap for that kind of stuff. So,
well, and the Vision consistently, and I don't think it's just down to it being Paul Bettany. Of course, it would not be proper without it being Paul Bettany. But I'm just interested. If he's on screen, I'm just inherently interested.
Yeah.
He has that a certain type of gravitas that I gravitate towards. And so when I think also because he's kind of a newborn in the world as well as being a wise man at the same time in a weird way. So his dealing with all that, I don't know. His origins in the movies is already kind of complicated, overcomplicated. Yeah. But his concept as a character is very much still the vision that I have a soft spot for.
Absolutely,
and it's so easy to identify with this man who seemed, or this being, this whatever you want to call it, the synthezoid, that I was very interested in what was going on with him, and also because things were happening to him in a way. I don't want to cast him in a victim role, but Wanda ultimately in that, as much as she was a victim herself and has been for a long time, she was also, bear with me because I'm going to forget details about these things because I saw them when they came out and then, lost some of that information, but she, in a way, whether she meant to or not, and what she was doing in that town was kind of continuing a cycle of violence or a cycle of manipulation. I don't think she intended to do that.
Right.
But that is kind of the trauma comes out sideways if it's not dealt with. And then, of course, this person has this insane power behind it, that this thing happens and then other people are victimized because of the explosion of emotion or what she's dealing with, that it comes out that way. I mean, I'm trying to apply, like, real psychological ideas to it, but so I think with me it's like, oh, I know that she's doing this to this situation because it's Wanda and I read comics, so now I feel bad for Vision and I feel bad for her, but she's causing this, and there's some part of her that wants this to happen,
right? So my read, and a lot of people have said that this destroys her characterization from WandaVision. I think what happens in here is it happens quickly. I will say that. And I do wish we had at least one other movie before this one, between WandaVision and this. But I think the character progression makes a lot of sense because in WandaVision, she's changing this world and it's like she's losing control, right? She doesn't really know how powerful she is. She's changing things. Half the time, she doesn't even realize she's doing it. And there's a lot of it's just like her trying to process her grief and not really completely understanding how she's affecting the world around her.
Right.
And that's why she leaves. Cause she's like, okay, I've clearly got this much more power than I thought I had. I can do a lot more than just move things with my mind. And I did not realize that before. And obviously I can't be in a place where I'm surrounded by people where I can cause all these problems to happen. So I've got to go somewhere else and I've got to learn about these powers. The best resource she has is the Darkhold. And as she starts reading the Darkhold corrupts her. So I thought it made perfect sense. And it was perfectly in character for her based on that.
I tend to agree. I mean, you and I are both coming, I'll put it this way, it depends on who is saying it doesn't fit that, but you and I are also coming from a place of prior knowledge of what the Darkhold is.
Right.
These stories that led to this place, like if you mentioned Scarlet Witch to me, I'm probably thinking of like, that's a complicated character with this history of causing problems that she doesn't even mean to sometimes.
Right.
And so you and I do have, I think, a different reference for where she's going and a shorthand for things that maybe someone who only knows the MCU, that they're not kind of jumping to that. So when it does go to this place that's obvious to a comic reader, I'm not saying it wasn't the right way to do it or anything, just that I can kind of see where that comes from. But I think I would bet that if in the movie Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, if the scene where she reveals that she's going to be the villain of the movie, she didn't just drop the facade all of a sudden, and it's not a bad scene, but I think if that just would have happened even 2 scenes slower, people might have not felt that way. But the fact that, and I kind of liked it, it was like, cool, we're not even going to pretend this isn't the villain for more than 5 minutes. That was a cool moment. Like, cool, great, let's get it going, because there's a lot of shit to get through here. But if you are not expecting that, or you're really connected to her, I can see where it's like, oh my god, you just revealed that Obi-Wan Kenobi is Darth Vader to me in 1 second, like all of a sudden. And I can see where I would bet that if you did that slightly different in the movie, not that they should have, people might have had a different feeling. That would have given them that ease into, like, if you saw her go through a process of, I'm not getting what I want that I need that's mine, that's justified.
Mhm.
As it is, she shows up already scheming. You know, because she's I don't know where they are. Are they in Sokovia when he goes to visit her, or like this, you know, burning wasteland?
I mean, you know,
I don't know
it's
what it
funny
is.
because when she ended up at the end of WandaVision, because they never
Mhm.
said at WandaVision where she was. My thought was, oh, she's in Wundagore. And then later
Right.
so that was my thought going in. And then later
Yeah.
we find out, no, this other place is Wundagore. So
Yeah. Well, it doesn't really matter where it is. I guess it's the idea that she's already, like, the Darkhold has taken such a hold over her, or she's been so influenced by it that she's willing to live in what looks like just a hellscape wherever
Right.
it is, but it must be a place on the earth, because I think Doctor Strange would know if he's visiting
yeah.
a hell realm of some kind. But she's like, when he shows up to ask her for help, she has already begun a plan of trying to get America Chavez and take her power, but also is actively lying to and scheming, you know, putting up this facade of I'm in an apple orchard or whatever it is.
Right.
So, now that I'm thinking about it, if it was apples, then they are kind of, whether they know it or not, commenting on the whole, well, the woman is causing the problems in the world of Genesis and the Bible.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I don't know if that was on purpose, but it does feel a little bit, whether they know it or not. But I don't have a problem with it because it's expedient for the story.
Mhm.
But I can see where someone would say, like, oh wait, she shows up a villain in this movie.
Yeah.
Even though she is, her reasoning is, and I do appreciate that her reasoning as a villain isn't evil is cool, so I'm gonna be evil. You
Right.
know, in her mind, she is justified. Sometimes it feels like it stretches credulity on my end that she is not seeing, you know, what she's doing. But I also understand that once you have committed to, I mean, it's kind of like if you're in a cult, you're a victim, and then you have done terrible things maybe as a result. But then you also have gone so far into this thing that if you start questioning it, you will have to answer to yourself for terrible things you've done. So you keep moving forward. Not just cults, plenty of places, plenty of people do this. I can see where that would be my argument for accepting her behavior to be continually this way. Not that she's lost her mind. And of course she is influenced by the Darkhold.
Right.
And that's kind of an easy comic book reason to allow her to do this. But I don't know. I choose to believe that there's a certain element of it that's like, some of this I feel is wrong, but if I stop doing it, I now have to go back and answer for what I've already done. And I won't even get the thing I'm going for, my children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was my biggest problem. As much as I did like that reveal, I think we needed a TV show or another movie or something like a Darkhold movie or something in between here to really help kind of make that corruption more obvious. Because like you said, having our prior knowledge of the Darkhold, I think that's a big influence on why we're able to see that. And so when she turned dark, I was like, okay, I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but I think it makes sense. So it worked for me in that level, at least. Now about and again, this is and I think also too, we got the issue of Chthon in the background type of thing too, where it's like it's been hinted at, and like my whole theory of WandaVision was, oh, it's not, everyone's talking, it's Mephisto. My whole theory was, no, it's not Mephisto, it's Chthon. It's who's and so I was really and then that didn't happen. I'm like, oh, okay, they didn't go that route. But with everything that was happening here, I kept feeling like Chthon's involved somehow. There's got to be something with Chthon here.
Well, and did they mention his name once in
there?
I
think they did. Sure. I think they mentioned it at some point,
Because there's this whole, Mount Wundagore, which it's cool that they found a way to use that in their own way, like kind of a streamlined version, of, it doesn't have to have all this high evolutionary, all the shit that they couldn't fit into the movie that wouldn't have served the story. That it is just this, basically evil mountain where magic also lives, and we're going to do this stuff there. It's cool that they worked that in, but they, on one hand, I was a little thrown off by things like Darkhold, Vishanti, Wundagore, that there was this implied mythology of things going on in the background. Like there's this carved version of her in the door. I started to wonder, if at the end of this, are we going to see that actually there isn't anything there, and that the Darkhold is just telling her that she's a chosen one, and that she's seeing this thing, and that it's like, no, actually the Darkhold will just use you to its own end, and that would highlight her victimhood of the Darkhold a little bit more. As it is, and on the other hand, I like when things aren't just all explained to me, especially when it comes to magic. Like at the end of the day, I don't want to know about the Vishanti and Atlantis, or if that whatever version of it they were going to give us,
Right.
or the writers of the Darkhold. Certainly not in this movie. There's no room for it. But they were supposed to have a certain weight to them, and they did because I read comics. And I don't know if a casual viewer they would have for me. And so that's kind of, I'm of two minds when I'm watching it. Like, yeah, I get that that's an important book, and also you stab it with the knife and it disappears, so I guess how powerful is it really? Like that's twice both books are destroyed and dispatched utterly with ease. Like it's just like you flick them and they're just done with.
Yeah.
So it's weird, but I don't know, that whole thing. Given what we were given, I would almost rather it be. What my takeaway was, there was no being behind this. I would rather it not be that. There's enough room in the world for them to introduce another being, later if they really want it. But I don't really want someone behind. I want this object, the Darkhold, to be the source of evil. That Wanda is a damaged, traumatized person who has been hurt so badly, wants something, reaches for something. It's the Darkhold, and the Darkhold is just an object that will take advantage of that hole, that hurt in a person, and it would in anybody. And it's not just her, and that she happens to be this powerful. It doesn't have consciousness, but it would want, it knows only, it's a poison. That's all it knows to do. And that makes it a more tragic story for me, that it is almost like an addiction story of I reached for power that would hurt, ultimately corrupt me, versus I was a victim of a Mephisto or a Chthon or whatever that made this happen. It both makes her more of a victim to me, that she just grabbed for something that was the wrong thing, and it gives her more she's more responsible. It's a more complicated story to me morally, and I like that. Yeah, if it's just, you know what, I made a mistake and it was a big one.
All right, I want to talk about America Chavez.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with her in the comics, because I know you said you're kind of like on and off reading comics. Like I've seen her in a bunch of things. I read the Al Ewing's Ultimate series, where she was a member of that. I read Kieran Gillen's Young Avengers. She was part of that team too. And I don't know, she's one of those characters that seems like she's more popular online than she really should be in the comic books. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's never really spoken to me that much of a character. I never found her that interesting in the comics. And I could never understand why there's all this internet buzz around her. Like, compare it to someone like Kamala Khan. I get the Kamala Khan buzz. Like, she's a great character. I get the Miles Morales buzz. He's a great character. America Chavez, I'm really just like, really? I don't see it.
I haven't read the comics. I've looked her up a little bit, especially because of this movie, just to get like, oh, how much? And I'm like, oh, they were pretty close to what they were doing in the comics with this, fairly complicated, pretty wild backstory of coming from, a utopian reality and all these things. I don't know who all the fans are, but I imagine in a landscape where for so long it has just been white men and then some white women for the most part, that, and I don't mean to critique, but that regardless of how great any of us are, America Chavez in the movie didn't appeal to me that much. Not the actor's fault, whatever. She was kind of a MacGuffin that with lungs, that she was kind of an object is how they treated her in the movie. But I was thinking about it, I was like, well, this has got to be so great if you've just been wanting to get into this and you wanted to see yourself represented on screen, like. And it's not like people are just accepting shitty characters. I don't think she's bad, but I would imagine that that's part of it. It's just that it's like, finally, not only do I have a Latinx character, I have a character who was raised by two mothers and has these things about her and is younger and all this stuff that I think that it's kind of like, why do I like some really truly dumb Marvel Comics characters?
Right.
Well, because I see potential in them and they reflect something about me that I like.
Now, I will say this though, even though like her character in the comics never really appealed to me, I really liked her in this movie. Even though, she's very likable. I liked her so much more in this movie than I've ever liked her in any of the comics I read her in. And I think a lot of that is down to Gomez's performance. I thought she did a great job with this character. And they had talked, I think there is an America Chavez Disney Plus series in the works, I believe.
Is there? Okay.
And when I heard about that, I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to be interested in that. But after seeing the movie, like, I'm like, okay, I'll watch her in that now.
it seems like a character that is well suited to being on a Disney Plus because one, the different multiverse stuff, you can kind of make every episode, you could go to a different world if you wanted to, something like that. And also that she is younger. It's not that you can't have a younger character headline a movie, but it does seem like a good place to incubate that kind of character and have them kind of, you know, get a rep and get experience and then ultimately be something else. But I have to say, having seen their version of her origin in the movie, if they don't continue to make canon that she saw a bee and then accidentally blew her mother's into the multiverse as an origin, then Kevin Feige, he's a coward if they don't keep with that. That was the funniest thing. I could not believe that's what they showed us in this movie, that she in her home universe was just hanging out and saw an insect, and then that is what sent her into the multiverse. Like, I could not believe that they did that. That's... What are they thinking? That's wild, because I looked it up. I'm like, well, maybe that's part of a comic story that I haven't read, and they're going to explain that at some point. It's like, no, that's not what happened in the comics. They just had this, like, happenstance thing be what caused that. So when I say that she is a MacGuffin, I certainly don't mean to speak of the actor's abilities. And again, if she wasn't the actress she was, I would really not like the character, I think, because she would feel lifeless. She is a young and inexperienced character who has a power that is not even really under her control for most of the movie. So she feels like someone who is just being moved along and is, again, a plot device more than a character making choices until the end of it. And then she starts making more active choices and is able to use her power. So she kind of lights up at that point. And then I warm up to her more. But she did feel like a way, like the pipe through which the multiverse is being delivered to us as MCU viewers. Like, hey guys, we're in the multiverse now. Every movie is going to have multiverse stuff in it for a while. And now this is a representation of that. I'm not extremely excited about that. I like, alternate universe stuff. I loved, like, every Elseworlds I used to buy as a kid. I loved What If. I liked Age of Apocalypse, but I also liked that these were stories that existed in their own worlds, and a certain amount of crossover with whatever the mainstream universe we're dealing with is good for me. But at some point it all starts to feel like it doesn't matter what's going on, because there's so many versions, and it's like, and the universe is so big, and there's so many versions of Captain America out there. What do I care if one of them dies, or this one released in this universe? And so I know some people are pointing to not just America Chavez, but the idea of incursions and all these things as maybe they're amping up to Secret Wars as the next big
that's
story.
what it seems like. And
it could be a lot of fun, because there was some fun to be had in the Illuminati universe that they went to. Like, I as a comic fan and an MCU fan, I still get a jolt out of, like, oh, that's a different version of the character I like. But as a emotionally engaging story for me, the bigger it gets, like, I just don't want to see I doubt they'll do it, but I want to see 10 years of build up to get to Secret Wars. That for me as a fan would be some time wasted, because even though there are real circumstances that happen to real characters, there's just something about it that it feels like an easy way to kill characters on screen, which they did with the Illuminati, and not have to pay for it with story ramifications after the fact. So that's not America Chavez's fault, but that's part of what she represents to me in this movie. Is we're moving into that, and that's, besides wrapping up Wanda, we're opening up apparently where we're going to be sitting for a while in the Marvel universe, it seems like, or in the MCU, I should say.
I love the multiverse stuff. I'm such a sucker for multiverse stuff. Like, when they introduced the idea of another world in Fringe, the TV show, I'm yes, like because you don't see that stuff in these kinds of productions usually. This is this kind of stuff that you got to go to, like, obscure Star Trek episodes, or you got to go to the comic books, because, like, the whole idea of multiverses, it always seemed like something like whenever they were going to adapt superheroes or sci-fi into big bunch of things, they're like, we're not going to touch that. That's too confusing for audiences.
Exactly.
So when we saw it, like, on Fringe, I'm like, holy shit, they got a multiverse. Or in one of my favorite, like, The Flash, right? The first end of the first season of The Flash, when they had Jay Garrick's helmet appear, I'm like, fuck, the multiverse. They're going to the multiverse. Like, I lost my shit. And and so I'm such a sucker for that. Secret Wars was, and I'm not a big fan of I don't hate the comic book events that they do, but I'm also not a big fan of them. Like, I'm not, like, personally offended like a lot of fans are by them, but
sure.
At the same time, just like, they're okay, but they're nothing that great. Secret Wars was one where I thought, this is legitimately really interesting and really creative. So if they build up to Secret Wars, I'm totally up for that. And But I want to talk about the multiverse aspect here, because on the one hand, and there's two parts of me. Adam Lance Garcia, who's been on the show a few times, he described it as, the lizard brain part and the rational brain part. And he was talking about himself with that. And I definitely feel that when I'm thinking about the multiverse aspect of it, because, on the one hand, I'm kind of like, wow, there was all those rumors about, is Tom Cruise going to pop up as the superior Iron Man, which would have been really cool to see, or, and then the other part of me is like, well, no, we got a few cameos, and I think the few that we got is actually really good that they didn't push it too far. I think I think the restraint was good there.
Well, yeah, you have to leave yourself somewhere to go with these things. And that, I think, and when I think of in terms of the multiverse stuff, I haven't seen anything that I'm like, oh, they shouldn't do that yet, or because I doubt I would react that way. But I think my fear as a viewer and a storyteller is that they're going to blow their wad too early, basically. Is that it's like, because you can amp those things up, but if you are showing me I don't know, just a crazy amount of alternate versions of characters so fast, which they haven't, then I'm like, okay, so where are the limits? Where are the boundaries? Because there's eventually you get to where I'm like, but I like the Daredevil series, and now how do I square that? It's different in comics. I feel like it's different in comics because you don't have real people in front of you. So it's easier for me to read Daredevil and know that it exists in the same world that, where there's 20,000 different versions of Daredevil just every second dying or something in another universe. I don't really have to square those two. But when there's the same actor appearing in these different things, I start feeling the interconnectedness in a more real way, which is a boon for the movies. But it also means that, well, in let's say the Captain American Captain American Winter Soldier movie, or whatever they're going to do next. Like, if the stakes aren't that high, but we're living in a world where this shit's happening regularly now, is it going to square? And again, I trust the filmmakers. I bet it will, but that's where my fear comes from, is that we're just going to open it up to where it's like every movie has some element to it of a multiverse thing. And that's probably an unfounded fear on my part. But the stuff that you get in this with the Illuminati, it's fun. Like, I mean, I wish that I hadn't spoiled it for myself by being on Twitter, because it would have been a little bit more of a fun thing. Like, wouldn't have expected the ones that we saw. But there was some fun stuff in there. Like, my favorite thing was seeing Haley Atwell again, because she embodied, in a short amount of time, a very cool character that, frankly, I'll go against what I just said and say I would love for that, Captain UK or whatever, to just join the MCU. Because I always want to see more of her, and she just felt right in that character to me. So that was the best thing about it for me. And it's cool to just see that concept, I guess, on screen, or a version of it, the Illuminati. No,
I get that. I've seen a lot of people make that same complaint you did, that if it's hard to jive with like the much more real world stuff of something like Daredevil, and have it also coexist alongside this multiversal stuff. And I feel like maybe it's because I've read so many comics that it doesn't feel unusual to me. It feels normal to me. And I think I think maybe comic book fans overthink it when there's that word. Because I think if you look at what most audiences react to it, I'll use the James Bond movies as a good example, right? You have something like Casino Royale, which is all about just, I have to win a high stakes poker game so I can stop this terrorist from getting money to fund his terrorist organization. And then in the next movie, I have to stop this, this psychopath from stealing all the world's water, right? And those two things can perfectly coexist by each side, even though the stakes are completely different. I feel like it's a lot of the same thing. I feel like most viewers, when they go into this, they're not thinking of, wait, how can Daredevil exist in here? And why should I care about what's happening with Daredevil here when there's this multiverse stuff here? I mean, I think about it as the same way with real life, right? I mean, a few weeks ago, my daughter had some pretty bad diarrhea, and it was like the end of the world for me, because I'm like, oh my God. But at the same time, right, there's a fucking war in Ukraine going on. There's, a white supremacist shooting up people in Buffalo. There's, another school shooting, and all this kind of stuff that's also happening. But I'm able to keep them separate in my mind, and like they're equal amounts terrifying for me personally, because one of them has very personal stakes. And I feel like it's the same way with these movies and TV shows. Like, if you had, if you did a Daredevil TV show and all of a sudden there was a multiversal element in there, then the stuff in the Daredevil TV show would seem small by comparison. But that's not how they do it. So I think I think most audiences have a kind of understanding about that.
I think you're 100% right about that. Like, I think my things that, well, one, I'm not a good litmus test for, I guess, the average MCU viewer, not because I'm special, but because I've read a bunch of comics and overthink these things. So I would agree with that 100%. And I think the idea of like, oh, well, this TV show won't matter to me because these movies do this thing in the same universe, it is ultimately not the problem. I think there is a part of me that thinks, how do you I'm not saying that they're doing this, but let's say that let's say they just did basically again what they did with the Infinity Gauntlet or the Infinity Stones, that here's our meta arc, and then it gets closed up at the end after 10 years or however long. If the multiverse is the same thing, again, who knows, probably isn't going to be the same thing. How do you close that without also destroying those things? Or if they're cut off, that's fine, but then the stakes coming back, I'm just thinking of how I'll experience it, not how successful it'll be, because I'm really that's not even the concern at all with Marvel stuff. More of if this is our focus for this time, which after Loki, after the most recent Spider-Man movie, with this, it feels like we're on the precipice. Well, not even on the precipice. We're in the middle of a thing that's going to go on for a bit. Probably not in every movie or TV show. I would doubt that.
Well, no, I think it'll be very similar to how the Infinity Saga played out, where you had all these others, but then you had there was a big string of movies there where they had nothing dealing with the Infinity Stones.
Totally right. And so I think it comes down to, one, just a thing of like, I don't want to, because it's not the thing that appeals to me the most, that I wish that we would get away, not from necessarily a meta arc across the movies and leaving the idea of multiverses being the issue. I would love to see more movies coming out of Marvel that, while they live in this universe, don't have such a clear connection point to furthering a story that's going to happen later, because this movie feels very much like, and my question of, is this a good Doctor Strange movie, or is this a good sequel to the first Doctor Strange? And in my opinion, the second one, not so much. Basically because it feels like a resting place for things that are happening in the MCU to happen. It's not like, this is the one movie we could do it in and people aren't going to I don't think this is truly what they thought, but this is a character we can shove other things into, because Spider-Man, you can't do that to. Captain America, Iron Man, they're too big. You're not allowed to do that. But with Doctor Strange, aside from plot reasons, you can do these other things in his movie that we need to do to move it along. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want the same experience in every sequel coming forward. And that would be crazy if they did that. I doubt they will. But I'm like, I don't want this to be a standard of everything is so mixed up on the plate. I want to see a movie where it's like, hey, this character and their supporting cast and a new villain do a thing. And I having not seen all of them, I think like Ant-Man and Black Panther are the last times that I saw that. Maybe Captain Marvel too, I guess. And it hasn't been that long, frankly. It feels like a long time because of COVID. It is. Yeah. But I'm like, I just don't want to lose that part.
Well, I think we also had, have you seen Shang-Chi yet? Because I think that had also.
Yeah, I saw that, and you're right. And that one, that is the more recent one that I saw in that. So, and it doesn't, until the last little tease at the end, doesn't feel like that. So again, I don't think that they're going to make what I would call a bad decision and do this with all of their future sequels, but it had my hackles up a little bit of like, I don't, it feels like the thing that people complain about in the comics a lot, which is like, oh, so I'm just buying issues to find out what happens in this overall story. Really buying a story that lands on its own, which I wouldn't go so far as to say that with this, that this doesn't work.
You know what I think one of the problems with this is it's got Doctor Strange in the title. And I think if they had just called this the Multiverse of Madness,
something like that,
I think it would have, I think a lot of those complaints would not have applied so much, because I think they're billing this as a Doctor Strange sequel. And you're right. It's like, we've been talking about the movie for a while now, and we're barely talked about Doctor Strange's role in it.
Right.
And you're right. And I think that's a very valid point. I think there's a problem with naming this a Doctor Strange movie when it's not really a Doctor Strange movie. It's a Doctor Strange team up movie, basically.
Yeah. And that's cool. And that's a good point. The packaging of it is is what it is. And I totally get why it's a Doctor Strange movie. That's not lost on me. It does feel somewhat, looking at the plot of it and looking at what happens with his character, like they try to give him an arc in this movie that to me doesn't feel connected to the first movie very much. His own first movie, like his arc kind of had landed in a place at the beginning or at the end of that movie, and then this one, this whole thing of like Christine, is it Christine?
Christine, yes.
Yes. Rachel McAdams' character, like that's even still a thing in this movie, feels grafted on to me. Like that relationship obviously was very important in the first one, but it didn't feel like it was dangling for me as a viewer. I just recently rewatched that, and I'm like, either they were together or they weren't. I don't know. It doesn't feel like his defining, like,
it did feel like they had closure there. Like,
yeah.
The way I saw the arc here, and I think it's just muddled because there's so much other stuff going on.
Yeah.
The way I saw the arc here was after Doctor Strange, after Infinity War and Endgame, I think Strange is kind of in this place where he feels like he's got to be the one to solve all the problems, right? And I think that's also, that's also something that happens with his counterpart in the beginning, which is why he tries to steal America's powers. He's like, look, you can't do this, but I can do this. I just need to take your powers away from you. And I feel like that's the journey Strange goes on in this movie, where he goes from this place of being like, I have to solve all the problems, even though, he's like, even though Wong got the Sorcerer Supreme thing on a technicality, because I was Blip for 5 years, it should be me. Like, I'm really the Sorcerer Supreme. And then when he gets to the end, he really kind of accepts that, you know what, I'm not the one who has to do everything myself. I have to be able to... Now, that is muddled. I will definitely grant you that. That is muddled because there's so much other stuff going on, and they have the Christine stuff plopped on top of it.
And it feels not truly grafted on. I don't really think that they wrote another movie and then put Doctor Strange juice all over it. But it because of this many-faceted nature, is maybe the kindest way to say it, of this particular movie, it feels like I'm getting like the vegetables of the meal to make it a Doctor Strange movie. Like, this is the way we'll make this about Doctor Strange, is we'll come up with, and it's not a bad character arc to have, to go from like control freak to, I don't, it's the kind of thing where I'm like, I just don't necessarily buy that he has gone on such a journey emotionally from the beginning of this to the end, similar in the first one, that he is now actually in this place of like, I don't got to do everything. Because also that seems like an important defining trait for him in some ways, but I won't argue against it happening. But that they want to tackle that and tie it into this relationship that, while important, I didn't think was a thing that was going to continue to inform his every action, which they make it extremely important in this movie.
Yeah.
And I will say it's well handled as far as the actors go. I mean, like, Rachel McAdams playing an alternate version of herself, and that they get closure through that is an interesting, very Marvel way to get that closure.
Right.
But when she asks him at the beginning of the movie, and it gets asked, later in the movie, are you happy? I think partly there's the issue of, I just don't care for this Doctor Strange that much. But I'm like, I don't know. Why do I care if he's happy? I just started watching him 5 minutes ago. I don't even know what his status quo is yet. He woke up, put on a tie magically, and went to a wedding for a character that I didn't even realize he still had this much connection to. And so when they're doing this thing that feels kind of like Grey's Anatomy-ish, like, it's not badly done, but I was like, I don't know. I don't even need this question asked of him. Like, I kind of want to just see what happens next. And I don't really feel like they explore it in a way that feels very fair to the character, because there's no room for that if they are going to go to that level. Also, the guy that shows up, the surgeon from the first one that shows up at the wedding, I laughed because I was like, because I watched this in the movie, I hadn't rewatched Doctor Strange, which I saw like 2 years ago. I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah, I had a moment like that too. It took me a minute before I remembered who he was. But you know what the funny thing is? He gets like top billing in the credits.
Well, he's a known actor, and he is, I mean, he was, a name in the first one, but apparently I had to look him up because I'm like, what is this guy's deal in the comics, if any? And he is a character who ultimately was a villain, a more like Brian K. Vaughan's The Oath, I think, miniseries. Okay. He was somebody who basically worked with Strange and then also happened to use sorcery at some point, and then was a villain for a short amount of time. So I don't know if they're trying to set him up at all for that, if it's just kind of a reference.
I think it might just be a reference.
I would bet. Well, they do go through the whole thing of like, he's like, I lost my cats and this other person that's important to me, and he's kind of throwing that blame on Doctor Strange. And it's like, I'm sounding like such a fucking sourpuss on this podcast. The whole 5-year thing is an interesting idea. I feel like it saddled future Marvel movies either with a world that's even further from our own, that is like a landscape that I would rather it be closer to our own, or to have to explain away why things still are normal for people. Because it's such a thing to leave a world with, of like, by the way, you know, it was The Leftovers for 5 years on Marvel. And now you either deal with that or you don't. And if you don't, you're ignoring a truth. And if you do, then you're forced to deal with that. So in that moment, I'm like, I don't want to hear about the 5-year thing. Let's just move on, because there's so much going on now here. But Strange in this movie, like, he gets to do. Here's we were talking about we weren't talking about Strange enough. He gets to do some really cool stuff in this movie.
Oh yeah.
His magic looks great. I like the way it looked in the first movie, but I'm going to put this on Sam Raimi, right or wrong, that the visceralness and the of the magic, like when he does things, giant demon hands just appear and physically move things around, or serpents coming out of his arms and all these things, that stuff makes him seem like he is doing a different kind of magic than anyone else, and I like that as my hero of the movie. Yeah. You know, that feels really cool.
I want to talk about Sam Raimi, Sam Raimi part about it, but first I want to just touch briefly on the Illuminati. What did you think of the little cameos we got?
So it was fun. I laughed out loud at a few things, and both in enjoyment and kind of somewhat in derision. The Professor X is the big one, right? I mean, between you and me, probably. I love Patrick Stewart. I love Picard. I love that guy can just go fart in public, and I'll applaud him probably. So I was glad that he was there. I knew that was going to happen. I knew that he was going to be basically X-Men the Animated Series as far as his appearance goes, like the kind of greenish suit and the chair.
The hover chair, yeah. I mean, they even had the X-Men theme playing in the background when he appeared. I love that.
So look, I love that theme. As a musician, as a guy who's scored some things before, I felt that was such an like, they didn't tease it. They played 2 full bars of it at full volume and a different orchestration. And I just felt like, yeah, we all know who this is. Come on, you don't gotta drop that. But I mean, there's another part of me that's like, X-Men, awesome. Leaving that aside, I just laughed because his chair. I think you talked about this on E
for Evolution.
Yes, thank you. That it didn't work in practice as well as it did on the cartoon. But my main concern is that he looked like a baby because the lap of the chair was almost at peck level, so it looked like he had a little dinner table that he was at the whole time, like a little dinner tray, and it just really sucked any seriousness he had as a character out. Of course, I loved seeing him. I will say that it was interesting that in this world, Doctor Strange, they all made a choice that clearly weighed on them heavily, that they killed Doctor Strange because of what had happened with him in the Darkhold and everything. But as things start going bad and Scarlet Witch shows up, within like 2 minutes, Professor X is also saying, by the way, if something happens to us, I trust you to handle this, even though I've also been treating you like a criminal in this whole thing. Like, everybody doesn't trust you, but I chalk that up to him being more of a humanitarian than some of the other characters that are in that mix. But I enjoyed seeing him. Krasinski as Reed Richards was never a choice, that online that people loved, that I was big on. I like Krasinski. I think he's very talented. He didn't do a bad job. He definitely had a weariness about him, which worked for that version of the character. Yeah. I didn't get the vibe of, and again, I watched The Office, so maybe this is why, I didn't get the vibe of world's smartest man who can't relate to humans as easily as some from him. That's the version of Reed Richards I'm more used to, is like his head's in a cloud. He loves his family, but he's also discovering new ways to make matter turn into energy all the time. Right. This is only a moment he gets to even portray that, so that's not on him. But I was like, hey, cool. It's cool to see him. And I liked how seriously the character was portrayed, that he was kind. That was the other thing. He had a kind way. He smiled when he saw this version of Doctor Strange. Like, I'm glad to see this guy. I was glad that we got to see Mordo in any version, and he was great, of course. I just really wanted to see.
When we saw the trailers, I was expecting that to be the 616 Mordo, so I was a little bit surprised that it was just the variant.
It was, and I really wanted to see him be friends with Doctor Strange, and of course you get this little twist, and it's like, well, he is, but he's not. And I just to have him on screen at all, I'm just very happy. But yeah, it's the first movie sets up a second movie that understandably was set aside for what we got, in my opinion.
Right.
Which is that the Doctor Strange, his own story is kind of secondary to the multiverse and Wanda stuff in this, and the version of Mordo, my mortal enemy now, and I are going to have to face off, is just completely set aside and not furthered. And I understand there's only so many minutes in a movie and ways you can tackle this stuff, but as someone who just really enjoyed it, I was very let down, but I was glad he showed up.
Yeah.
I loved Carter. You know, I loved seeing Captain UK again. I would bring her to the MCU proper in a second as another addition. Lashana Lynch as Captain Marvel. That was just cool to see that they would reach for that character and put her in the kind of Kree colored, you know, green and silverish thing, and that she and Agent Carter were the ones that got to really, you know, like kick the shit out of Wanda as much as they could. Like, they were the ones that lasted the longest, and you got to see that. Like, that was a great action sequence, well shot by Raimi, of course. Like, I want to see him do the Raimi of it. I know we'll probably get to that in a minute. The Raimi of it all is that as good as he did, and as much as he got to be himself in this movie, I long to see an MCU movie with a cleaner story for him to portray. If not an origin story, then it won't be Captain America, but a Captain America movie where Captain America faces off against this threat, and it's relatively simple because he can do so much more iconic, you know, like Kirby style or just stuff, or the kind of psychedelic period from Captain America, something like he did with Spider-Man, where it's like, hey, I have a character, I have a world, this is mine, and I get to go, because I think he excels even more in that world. But this action scene was really cool. As much as I'm not a huge fan of let's kill some randos or you know, other versions of characters to get the feeling of killing people. Black Bolt, did you watch the Inhumans show at all?
Yeah, I watched it. Okay. I watched it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I watched it. It was terrible. It was
okay.
I'm someone who I have loved almost everything Marvel has done, right? There's the only, like, I hated Iron Man 3 when I saw it. I've kind of come around on that. But even like the ones that people hate, like I like the Dark World. I don't mind the Dark World. I liked Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But Inhumans, I could not like that. It was just it was not good.
I never watched it as a concept in the comics. I can't go off on Inhumans. I'm already saying too much. But Inhumans, for me, are more relatable, or I've just liked them more in the comics than I ever did the Eternals. And I didn't really love the Eternals movie. But I did not watch the TV show and, of course, heard such not great things about it that I avoided it. So I was a bit surprised to see Black Bolt in the Illuminati just because it felt
and it's the same actor. They brought Anson Mount back.
And I love Anson Mount. I really like him. I didn't realize that it was the same actor at first because how would I didn't watch the TV show.
I was looking at the entire time because it's hard to tell because he's wearing the mask in this, where in the TV show he wasn't. So the entire time I'm sitting there saying, like, is that Anson Mount? I'm not. And afterwards I had to go look it up and find out, okay, it was him.
Well, okay, in the show, did he do this weird face acting stuff where he's like doing weird smiles and like shh, and that is he that kind of
I mean, it's hard because it's been a while since I've seen the show. But I know he had done a lot of preparation, like you know, studying like nonverbal communication, all that.
Sure.
And like working out like hand signals and hand signing and all that kind of stuff. So he had done a lot of preparation for that character.
Well, and it's like, I mean, it was entertaining, but his character, the way he came across as a person wasn't the Black Bolt that from comics, which is a different thing. Like, he's kind of a solemn king there.
Right.
And his, like, facial expressions said, like, I'm a bit of a trickster in this world. Like, I'll be like, hey, you better watch it. I might scream at you and your whole body will explode. Like, that kind of feeling, which, I don't know, that could be a fun version of him. But, his death was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like, it was a Matrix moment too, because his mouth is wiped off of his face. So it reminded me of that. But I was like, you know, and there's been this argument. I assume you may have seen it. You know, like, some people are having a hard time with the more horrific imagery in this movie. Some people are arguing that it should have been R instead of PG-13, which I think is missing the point of what PG-13 was created for. I understand you're not expecting this from, you know, Marvel, but that doesn't change the rating. But it was like it was a humorous moment more than a scary one. Like, I was laughing my ass off because the look on his face is like he just shit his pants, kind of cross-eyed and everything. That was amazing. That was awesome. I love.
Although what I thought you were going to say is, like, a lot of people were mocking the fact that Reed basically tells Wanda how to take out a Black Bolt.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
I mean, my whole thing was like he doesn't know that she has that much power, so I don't think that's really an issue.
And it's, and I can't, I mean, even if I was going to, and I've been plenty nitpicky, but I'm not even going to nitpick that part because my limited experience with writing that kind of thing, and certainly a lot of experience reading that kind of thing, when you throw that many characters with this many weird sets of powers and backgrounds and personalities into a room, you just need to get from point A to point B.
And also, no, I guarantee, 90% of the people who are watching this movie did not see the Inhumans TV show. And
no. And
the Inhumans has never been very popular as a comic. As much as I love a lot of Marvel stuff, I've never been able to get into the Inhumans. It's just.
Did you ever read the Paul Jenkins?
I've got to check out. Check out that one. Yeah.
I don't know how it holds up. I mean, Jay Lee always rules, but at the time, I really enjoyed it. That was junior high probably for me.
Right.
No, I did have this question of and seeing it, I'm like, I know who Black Bolt is, whether this is the guy from the TV show or not. Are there not more casual Marvel fans who are saying, who is this guy? Why is he here?
I think there might have been.
There must have been. If it's not Captain America or Iron Man, I got to question, what are they doing here? But it's funny, you were talking about how we've introduced how the MCU has introduced over time this, the crazier concepts, the things that are too weird, how multiverses at some point was just too weird. And that's something that I've thought a lot about too, where if you go back to Iron Man, let's say only keeping it to MCU, Iron Man presents you with mostly semi-weird real world things, terrorism, technology, business, corporations. That's really all you get out of it. It's like near future sci-fi. And then over the years, they have gradually introduced the most comic booky weird shit piece by piece. It's like putting poison into somebody's meals over the years. Until all of a sudden, the average person on the street is like, well, yeah, the multiverse, 616, 836.
Well, I mean, look at the CW. They did it in an even more extreme fashion because, Arrow was completely grounded, right? They didn't even want to call him Green Arrow for the first few seasons. And it was all he's the Hood, he's the vigilante. We're not going to give him a mask. He has grease paint over his eyes. And then, And then season 2, we start getting Black Canary and then and Ra's al Ghul. And then season 3, we get the fucking Flash, and then and then it just keeps going on until we get Crisis on Infinite Earths and Legends of Tomorrow, where they've got giant demons fighting giant stuffed animals.
Right. Well, and all that is to say these are good things, of course. But it is funny to see how, and I guess Marvel took a slow burn approach to it, but it does feel, whether it was intentional or not, it feels like a very tactical way of rolling out. Our stories can't just be people in suits, people with tech, people with science powers or whatever.
Right.
We have to start introducing all these other things that we have at our disposal. Inhumans, Eternals, Celestials, whatever the hell. And that it is both funny and really cool as a comic book fan to see how in a movie like this you can roll out things like a multiverse, different kinds of magic, the damned, that there's a hell basically, that you can have these alternate versions of people, they're dying, all this stuff happening, characters that probably half the audience don't even know or care about, but it's a lot of people aren't reacting with, what am I looking at?
People are along for the ride.
Yes, whatever it is. And so that is a testament to so much of what they've done right, even from just a corporate standpoint, as versus that might feel. That you can dump a bunch of weird stuff on people now and they're eating it up as this is what comic book movies are. It's lovely. I love it.
Just a few brief points, some of my thoughts on the Illuminati. I thought it was really cool bringing back Captain Carter from the What If episode, and also the Dark Doctor Strange. They brought that in from What If as well. So I thought that was a cool little callback. The Captain Marvel thing, it was an interesting choice. I'm just kind of didn't feel I don't know. It just felt it felt like we need to have some other variant type character here. So let's just call up Lashana Lynch and have her be Captain Marvel. Black Bolt was cool to see. That was the one that had surprised me because obviously from the trailers, we knew Patrick Stewart was going to be in it. And then some fucking and I'd stayed off Twitter for the week before, and then some fucking jagoff website, right in the headline, they put John Krasinski as Reed Richards in and leaks as Richard. And I'm like, motherfuckers, right in the goddamn headline on Google News. I'm specifically staying off social media because I can avoid this, and still happens.
That's a bummer.
So that was spoiled for me. I was surprised to see Anson Mount as Black Bolt that. That was a surprise for me. That was the one of the cameos that really kind of surprised me. The other one that surprised me, which probably everybody else who's that, was Clea popping up at the end. I'm like, that's fucking Clea. That's awesome. I'm not even a big Doctor Strange fan, but I think that's cool.
I definitely. I mean, I that also had been, I mean, literally everything that was like a thing that should have been a whoa surprise. I knew about, and so that was more of a matter of like, it'll just be interesting to see physically what they do with this.
Yeah.
With Charlize Theron, and it's like, yeah, they did a version of this weird character design of white hair and pink and purple stuff all over, and she opens up this portal to the dark dimension as we saw it, in the original Doctor Strange, which makes me hope that like, yeah, let's get back to some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Not just dark dimension, but like, some of the things that were set up in the first one.
Right.
That was cool to see. I guess because I'm not, as much as I enjoy Doctor Strange, and we talked about it a lot at the top, but like, I'm not so connected to the character and his backup character and his supporting characters that the appearance of like Rentra, the Minotaur character, I was more excited about, just because it's such a deep cut relative to actually, it's kind of like the next level down from Doctor Strange in his world or whatever. But it'll be really cool. That's a good fit for a romantic interest / sharing the lead, both as on an actor level and just a character that she's not, the character sometimes has been a bit of a like, oh, I just love Doctor Strange, as would be typical of a female character.
Well, especially because in the comics now, I think she's actually the new Sorcerer Supreme.
Right. And who knows what they'll set up with that.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
I don't know if Charlize Theron is in for that, but yeah, that's a movie that I would like to see, because it would be nice to see him up against someone that has something on him in his own world that he is attracted to, all the things that would come up with that.
Right.
Like, that's kind of a screwball comedy I would like to see these two against each other. And so that I'm excited for that. There was, all the universes that we didn't get to explore that they just went through when they crossed through. One, that was just a visual feast of effects and he's breaking up into like cubes at the end of it and everything. But they go through an animated universe. They go through all these things, and I just wanted this movie. I was like, I just want a movie that is 20 different worlds that they go to, which I'm sure it costs a ton. But I was like, if we're gonna do that, let's do it. Let's sit down and do all of those, which isn't a complaint. It's like, makes me excited for if we are getting into multiverses. Give me a feast of those kinds of things visually, all the ways, because they did. They came up with a different way of portraying the world of the Illuminati that you could kind of take from what you see. This does seem a little bit more high tech, maybe, and that maybe explains, the Illuminati maybe has more control over how things are going. Maybe it's darker than we realize.
Something I would have wanted to see, and I'm probably the only person on Earth who would have wanted to see this. I will admit that. But it would have been kind of cool if the Dark Doctor Strange was actually played by Peter Hooton, and who played him in the original movie.
Oh, interesting.
Who is still alive? He's still around.
That would be cool. That I mean, hey man, you and I would be enjoying that just as like nerds about the stuff. Yeah. When that stuff, it's the best is when you can do something like that and the reference is cool, but it also just works because the work is good. That's the best. I don't want stuff just because it's
no, absolutely. Yeah.
But that would be very cool. Well, we do get another Doctor Strange in this, besides the one at the beginning, which I have to say, that black and red costume that he wore, that version of him, that's, I think, from one of the more recent Defenders.
I think it's from,
series.
it's Matt Fraction's Defenders run, if I'm remembering correctly.
I wish he would have just taken that off of him and started wearing it, because I'm kind of tired of the blue tunic, and I think that's a cooler looking, like, more dynamic look on screen for him. But that aside, we got zombie Doctor Strange.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ, I thought that was awesome.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe this is where we can get into more Sam Raimi stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's so much up in his wheelhouse. But if you just wrote zombie Doctor Strange on paper, I'm like, great, more zombie shit. Because it's kind of, like it's like pirates or tacos or whatever. Just like everybody, of course we all like this. But it's not a zombie Doctor Strange. It's Doctor Strange having to find a way to get back to his own reality when he's stuck in this one. So he takes over this dead version of himself from another. It's so complicated, but I love it because it's just so like the moving parts of it are so stupid in a good way, like in a comic book way, I guess.
Yeah.
But I am not kidding. If he just played zombie Doctor Strange in the rest of his movies, I would be fine with it. He is so funny and affecting emotionally for me as zombie Doctor Strange. Part of it is that the way he's having to talk, because it looks like they're using prosthetics on him, not just CG, which I love. It looks great. The rot looks real. But have you seen Darkman? I think you have that.
Yes, we that's the next episode actually.
Yes,
that's coming out on the feed at the time of this recording.
So part of the prosthetics they did for that, which is the Sam Raimi show as well, are that they basically had to put extra skull over his face, Liam Neeson, to make it to where it looks like part of his skin has rotted off. So his teeth are like extra teeth outside of his face.
Okay.
And that's why he's kind of having to enunciate more, and he kind of talks like someone with dentures. And I felt like that's what was happening with Zombie Strange in this because of the prosthetics. But it almost felt like, because there are plenty of callbacks to Sam Raimi movies in this, that felt like one because you've got a half-rotted face like Darkman. But it also reminded, like, the physical acting he was doing with all the jerky movements. Some of that was camera work, but some of that is just Benedict Cumberbatch playing it both real and so funny, so funny. And the voice, the different voice he does, it reminded me of Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black.
Oh yeah,
A bad cat, all that stuff that he did. Like, there's so much business going on that because of the way it's shot with Raimi, that point on up until probably everything gets wrapped up in the movie is the easily my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah,
because it is both so funny and scary. You've got all this Raimi stuff with the evil spirits that are circling him, and they're all talking like this, and I'm. The amount of references to Sam Raimi stuff, I actually was like, I don't need all this because it starts to feel like a weird glad-handing thing, or I don't know, it just feels like not part of the Marvel thing. But the tone of it, he opens his eyes and you hear like the sting of a heavy metal guitar. It's so wild, the turn that they take, and that whole segment where he's got a whole cape made out of demons. Man, give me more of this. Give me that the whole movie through. I was so jazzed by that whole thing.
See, when I got to that point in the movie, that was the point when I really realized, I'm like, Sam Raimi is actually the perfect director for Doctor Strange. Because and I was comparing it to the Spider-Man movies. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. They're good movies. Well, at least the first two are. The third one's a little bit, iffy.
Sure.
But one of the problems I always had with his movies is I don't feel like Sam Raimi's sense of humor really fits Spider-Man, right? Like Spider-Man's very much, much more sarcastic, much more witty. Raimi's humor is much more campy. And that doesn't really fit how I see Spider-Man, which is why I thought, like, whenever Tobey Maguire tried to crack a joke as Spider-Man, I'm always like, this isn't quite hitting on me. Whereas compared to like
the milquetoast part of the character,
but
not
exactly
so much the smarmy part.
Exactly. Whereas Andrew Garfield, when he had a joke as Spider-Man, boom, nailed it every single time. Tom Holland too, pretty much nails it every single time, and he's got like that good synthesis of the two versions. But yeah, like, and part of it too is just like Raimi's style of humor just does not fit Spider-Man. So as much as I love those movies, like, one of my favorite parts of, like, it doesn't play to his strengths as a director either, those Spider-Man movies. And like, I think one of my favorite parts of Spider-Man 2 was the scene when Octavius wakes up in the hospital and the arms are going all crazy and they're killing everybody, right? He's able to really lean into his horror sensibilities with that, like the campiness, the whole thing with the chainsaw and all that. With Doctor Strange, like, it's just like Sam Raimi is allowed to cut loose and indulge in the horror aspect. He's allowed to indulge in the campy humor aspect. And I think all of that really works for Doctor Strange.
It certainly did here, and certainly for me, and this particular stretch of it. It's not that there was no sign that Sam Raimi was making the movie up until that point, because there were plenty of times where there were parts of it that just kind of feel like a Marvel movie, kind of shot in not a particularly characteristic way, but the way the magic was handled and some of the camera turns that were you just like in a kaleidoscope hallway and stuff like that, they're very Sam Raimi. But that is very much where the tone, everything comes together. The circumstances of the plot. It is also the moment when maybe you jettison most of the things that are MCU about it,
right?
Involving multiverse and these things. It's down to you have Scarlet Witch, who has now become basically a slasher monster,
right?
Because of that, when she's hunting them through the pipe hallway that they're in. At one point, she just keeps walking through every door, and they just keep, and she's getting dirtier and bloodier and bloodier. She looks like Carrie from the movie Carrie in that moment. The way that they're shooting her is very much like Freddy is here, or Jason.
Well, also the scene when she's pursuing them in Camertage too, when she's coming through the reflections and all that. I thought that was brilliant, like the contortions and all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, it was very much a Grudge moment. Where which isn't even a Sam Raimi movie, but like he was playing. I mean, hell, I could have gone for more of that. And again, it's a different movie, whatever. But that moment, like, all he has to deal with is Doctor Strange is doing the wildest thing he can possibly do. And he is leaning into the damnation of it all and the infernalness of it all. And you just get a both a visual feast, and you get a moment between him and America Chavez that, even though I wasn't buying this arc for Doctor Strange of letting go, I think because he is physically vulnerable in that moment, because he's kind of been knocked down and is in this rotting body, that he is willing to encourage someone else for maybe the first time in his appearances in the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
MCU, where it's like he is doing something altruistic that you couldn't even mistake for being just a smarmy thing. It got to me. It was just like he is willing to go the distance. He is a hero in this moment, and he is handing off the hero-ness to this person. That's what makes him the hero. But yeah, that man, that just got, like, I loved that whole segment. I don't know why it brought to mind, like, I was like, why don't we just get a Sam Raimi movie where Doctor Strange fights Dracula and it's campy as hell? Like, something like super horrific, and just lean into, bring Dracula, bring the campy parts of MCU horror or Marvel Universe horror into the MCU and expand on that. Like, that would be a movie I would go to town on. I mean, I was excited. Just watching that made me so excited for what I wished I had seen more things like that in the movie. Totally understand what they would not have fit into the things that they were trying to accomplish. But when I heard Sam Raimi and Doctor Strange, I didn't know that that's what I was looking for, but that was it. Was that moment on. But there's, they do these various things, like, I guess Bruce Campbell. That's the thing that I'm thinking of. Where on one hand, of course, I know Bruce Campbell's going to be in this, and I love Bruce Campbell, and I want him to show up in the movie. This and a few other references they do later, that Pizza Papa thing was hilarious at first for me. I'm just him saying, I'm the Pizza Papa. Like, as if everyone knows this one guy in New York that sells pizza. But then he has to go to the level of not just, well, you guys know Bruce Campbell from my movies. I actually have to have Doctor Strange punish a man for accusing him of stealing for 3 weeks of punching himself in the face so that I can refer to one of my most famous movies that he did this in already. Felt just like 3 layers too meta for me, where it took me out of the movie. I'm like, no, just let it be Bruce Campbell. It's fine. You can.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, again, I would rather that happen than him not lean into the fun of let's bring Bruce Campbell and let him do a thing, But I wonder what Sam Raimi will do, if he'll do anything else.
I mean, I hope he comes back for the third Doctor Strange movie, because after seeing what he did here, and now that we've got the Wanda stuff all out of the way, and we've set up the multiverse stuff, so it would be really cool to get Doctor Strange to have a movie where it can just be like Doctor Strange doing weird shit like this.
Exactly. That is definitely what I would like to see. Even if it's not, I mean, I would rather it not just. I feel like if it's going to be like Mordo and Clea, that it'll be very close to the plot of the first movie, or at least like the same playing area. So bringing in something like Nightmare would be interesting, or something more viscerally horrific, like, I mean, even if it's not Dracula, something in the world of, like, here's a physical horror that we can deal with. I would love to see when I say cleaner, I don't mean like this story was bad, just something that's not so scattershot as to include Avengers and Doctor Strange and things to come. Like a movie about a character accomplishing a goal would be great. I would love to see that with Doctor Strange.
Okay, so we've been talking for a long time about Multiverse of Madness. Do we have any final thoughts about this?
It was, I think I'm probably borrowing someone else's words, but it's a messy movie, but in a way that was very enjoyable ultimately. And it is truly a comic book fan's dream, if you grow up at the time that we did, probably, to see any of these things in a movie, let alone all of these things in the same movie. So, I mean, I'm really excited that they continue to allow and encourage and highlight the weirdness of the Marvel Universe, because it's a place where sci-fi and fantasy and horror and superheroes and crime and everything coexist and have to coexist.
Right.
And that makes for some weird stuff, and that's where the most unique things come from.
Yeah, agreed. Like, it's a big movie. There's a lot of stuff happening in here, maybe arguably too much stuff happening.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a messy movie, like you said. But overall, I'm glad that they swung for the fences on this. I think and it was cool to see all this stuff. And apparently there's a rumor that there's a Scarlet Witch movie in the works. So I'm not sure if you've ever read James Robinson's solo Scarlet Witch series from a few years ago.
No, I haven't.
They pulled some stuff from that in WandaVision, like the whole idea of the Scarlet Witch being like kind of a legacy thing.
Right.
A lot of that stuff came from Robinson's run, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's where it started from. So it'd be really interesting to see if they pull from more of that stuff and what they do with that.
Well, I guess, and not to extend this too much further, but because I won't comment because I've already said I'm not huge on Scarlet Witch, but since you liked her in this portrayal, at the end of the movie, it seems like she has maybe died. Who knows? I know it's superheroes, but would you be coming out of this in her story? Would you be wanting a Scarlet Witch movie? Is that something you're jonesing for?
Not necessarily jonesing for, but it's not something I'm opposed to either, right? Yeah. It's not like when I heard about the news of a Scarlet Witch movie, I wasn't like, they can't do that. That's ridiculous. And
sure.
Like, I feel like it was kind of surprising the way she ended in this movie. And I'm kind of like, I don't think they're done with her. I feel like there's more stuff they got to do with her. Because I think because I feel like she has to go on a redemption arc. I feel like that's the next step for her.
Yeah. I mean, the cynic in me for any character wants, whether it's Scarlet Witch or somebody else, there to be a character arc that goes basically as Breaking Bad for a character in the movies, so that we do have some part of this that isn't just always going to be recycled so that we can do a new toy. Like we gotta get a hero back. So there's a part of me that's like, no, just let her life have ended somewhat tragically, but she did a heroic thing at the end.
So like she got like Hal Jordan before Rebirth.
Exactly. I mean, and I'm glad Hal Jordan's back, but like, he got his thing. Well, because like the way that the end of her story is satisfying to me in that, one, she does have to confront what she's become because America sends her to be seen for what she is at that moment by her alternate universe children, and that she's hurting this alternate version of herself. That was satisfying for me because it's not even punishment. It is a mirror to be held up to her.
Yeah.
And then that she made a heroic choice to no longer do that. That seemed, at least in the moment, to also be self-destructive. Felt like a satisfying ending for me. But I mean, if something's good, it's good. So yeah, I guess we'll see what they do.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where they go next. I'm up for it. I'm always up for, I even with the missteps, things I don't agree with, in general, I like these movies more than I don't. So I'm willing to just go along with the ride and trust what Feige is going to do next.
Sure.
All right. Will, tell people where they can find you.
I am at Will Short Haha on Twitter, and I co-host a podcast called the Days Past Tooncast. It's a comedy program where we talk about the Saturday morning cartoons of yesteryear. No Doctor Strange in there yet, but there's X-Men, there's some very old Avengers cartoons in there, some Spider-Man. So there are some comics things there. If you like that, if you like cartoons, it's a good place to go listen. You can find that really anywhere you can find podcasts. You can follow us at DP Tooncast, either on Twitter or Instagram. Days Past Tooncast. Okay,
great. Well, thanks again for coming on. It was fun to have you back, and you're more than welcome to come back on anytime you want.
Thank you, sir. I will.
Okay, we still got to get you to talk about Once Upon a Deadpool.
That's right. All right.
So that we got to do that.
I'm going to put it in the queue.
Yeah, awesome. We got to do that then. All right. That does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephile. SuperheroCinephiles.com is the website. Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to join our Patreon, you get these episodes a week in advance. And I'm going to start dropping some other stuff on there fairly soon. So hopefully by the time you hear this recording. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.